4,500 years ago, I ordered humanity to move a mountain. Not a hill, not a monument, a mountain. More than 2 million stones would answer that command. Each stone heavier than the strength of many men. Each stone cut from the bones of the earth itself. Dragged across burning desert sand, lifted slowly toward the sky, until the horizon itself would change forever. And when the work was finished, the world would see something no civilization had ever dared to build. But understand this before anything else. I was not building a tomb. I was building a message. A message meant for people who would not be born for thousands of years. People whose language I would never hear. People whose world I could never imagine. People like you. My name is Khufu, Pharaoh of Egypt, ruler of the two lands, guardian of the Nile, living God to my people. But before I became a god in their eyes, I was simply a boy standing in the shadow of kings. I remember the palace corridors of my childhood, cool stone beneath my bare feet, tall columns painted with stories of gods and rulers long dead, servants walking softly so their footsteps would not disturb the silence of power. Everywhere I turned, I saw statues of pharaohs who came before me, stone faces carved with eternal confidence, eyes staring toward a future they would never see. My tutors spoke of them with reverence. Great kings, they said. Men chosen by the gods. Men whose names would live forever. Yet even as a boy, I noticed something the priests did not mention. Some of those names were already forgotten. The wind had begun its slow work. Sand crept along the edges of their monuments. Time had begun its quiet erasing. And I wondered something no child should wonder. If kings are gods, why do their monuments crumble? Why do their names fade? Why does the desert swallow everything? No priest answered that question. Perhaps because they feared the answer. Or perhaps because they knew the truth. Even kings are temporary. The Nile floods, the Nile retreats. Generations rise, generations vanish, and time watches all of it with perfect patience. Years passed. The boy who asked those dangerous questions grew into a man, and the day came when the crown of Egypt was placed upon my head. The ceremony was held within the great temple. Priests filled the air with incense and sacred chants. Nobles knelt upon polished stone floors. Generals bowed their heads before me. The double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt was lifted carefully by the high priest. Red and white joined together in one symbol of absolute rule. When it touched my head, the entire temple fell silent. In that moment, a strange loneliness filled my chest. Because when everyone kneels, no one stands beside you. The priest declared that the gods themselves had chosen me. They said the sun rose because Pharaoh protected the order of the world. They said the Nile flooded because Pharaoh pleased the heavens. They said Egypt existed because Pharaoh stood between chaos and harmony. And my people believed them. But inside my own mind, another truth whispered quietly. I was still a man. I still felt doubt. I still felt fear. Especially the fear that had followed me since childhood. The fear of being forgotten. Not by my enemies, but by time itself. That fear grew stronger the day I walked through the burial grounds of the kings who came before my father. Their tombs rose from the desert like broken teeth beneath the sun. Some were grand. Some were crumbling. Some had already begun to disappear beneath drifting sand. Once these men ruled the world, I knew. Once their voices commanded armies. Once their names filled temples with praise. Yet time had already begun to silence them. In that moment, the truth became clear to me. Power rules the living. But time rules kings. That day, the idea began. At first, it was only a whisper inside my thoughts. What could a man build that time itself would struggle to destroy? Temples crumble, cities decay, empires collapse. Even the greatest statues eventually fall. But mountains endure. Mountains outlive civilizations. Mountains watch centuries pass like clouds drifting across the sky. And so the thought grew stronger. If nature would not grant me a mountain, then I would command one to be built. But where could such a monument stand? Not within the fertile valley of the Nile, where floods reshape the land each year. Not within the cities where generations rebuild and erase the past. It had to stand where time itself moves more slowly. It had to stand in the desert. West of the Nile lies the land of the dead, the place where the sun sinks each evening into the underworld. And there, above the valley, rises a vast plateau of stone. The Plateau of Giza. From that height, the entire world of Egypt unfolds below. The Nile glimmers like liquid silver beneath the sun. Fields stretch outward in deep green ribbons of life. Villages breathe quietly along the riverbanks. Boats drift across the water, carrying grain and stone and stories. The river feeds Egypt, but the desert preserves eternity. Standing upon that plateau for the first time, I felt certainty. Here the mountain would rise. Here the message would be carved into the earth itself. Yet deciding to build a mountain and truly building one are very different things. Before the first stone could be lifted, the mind had to understand the impossible. So I summoned the greatest thinkers in Egypt, architects whose eyes could measure the land like hawks measure the wind, surveyors whose ropes and tools could divide the earth with astonishing precision, astronomer priests who studied the stars every night, men who believed the heavens themselves spoke in patterns waiting to be understood. For many months, we studied the Plateau of Giza. We measured the ground again and again. We studied the stars above the desert sky. We traced the movements of the heavens across the seasons. Because the pyramid could not simply rise from the earth, it had to rise in harmony with the cosmos itself. The priests watched the northern stars that never sink below the horizon. They circle endlessly through the sky without ever touching the earth. They called them the imperishable stars, the eternal ones, the destination of a pharaoh's soul. When a king dies, his spirit must climb to those stars and join the eternal gods. So the pyramid was aligned with astonishing precision to the four directions of the world: north, south, east, west, perfectly balanced between earth and sky. Yet even the greatest design cannot move stone, and stone does not move easily. The body of the pyramid would require more than 2 million limestone blocks, each weighing several tons, some far heavier. The quarries near Giza awakened with the sound of tools striking stone. Copper chisels struck the limestone again and again. Stone hammers echoed across the desert. Dust rose into the hot air like pale smoke. Men carved the blocks carefully from the living rock, each stone shaped with remarkable precision. Each stone prepared for a place it had not yet reached. But limestone alone would not protect the king's chamber. For that, we needed granite. Granite born deep within the earth, where heat and pressure forged the hardest stone known to our people. Those stones lay far to the south in the quarries of Aswan, hundreds of miles away. And somehow they too would have to reach Giza, even if the journey seemed impossible. Because once a king imagines eternity, nothing less will satisfy him. Even if the journey seemed impossible. Because once a king imagines eternity, nothing less will satisfy him. So the work spread across Egypt like the unfolding of a great design. In the south, at the distant quarries of Aswan, men began cutting granite from cliffs that had stood untouched for ages. These were not ordinary stones. Each block weighed more than 70 tons. Stone so hard that copper tools alone could barely wound it. Dolerite, pounding stones, struck the granite again and again, hour after hour, day after day, until the living rock finally surrendered its shape. When the blocks were freed, they were dragged slowly to the banks of the Nile. There, massive wooden barges waited in the water. The river that fed Egypt would now carry the bones of the earth itself. When the flood season came, the Nile rose and spread across the land like a shining sea. And with it came the barges carrying granite toward the north, toward Giza, toward the mountain that had not yet risen. But the stones were only the beginning. The true strength of the pyramid would come from the people. Many believe such monuments are built by slaves, but they do not understand Egypt. When the Nile floods, farmers cannot plant their fields. Their land sleeps beneath the water. So during those months, the people came to Giza, thousands of them. Farmers, stone cutters, carpenters, rope makers, boatmen, surveyors. Men who had never seen the desert before arrived carrying their strength and their hope. A city rose beside the construction site. Not a city of temples and palaces, but a city of labor. Long barracks where workers slept shoulder to shoulder beneath the desert wind. Bakeries where bread was baked day and night. Granaries filled with grain brought from every corner of Egypt. Workshops where tools were sharpened and ropes woven. Even houses of healing where broken bones were set and wounds cleaned with care. Because a worker who survives builds another stone tomorrow. And tomorrow, the pyramid must rise again. Each morning, the desert filled with the sound of movement. Thousands of footsteps across the sand, the creaking of ropes, the shouts of overseers guiding the labor, the deep chant of men pulling together in rhythm. Great wooden sledges carried the limestone blocks across the desert floor. Hundreds of men gripped the ropes at once, their muscles tightening as they leaned forward together. Water was poured onto the sand before the sledges. Wet sand reduced the resistance beneath the wood, and slowly the massive stones began to slide forward. A few steps at a time, then a few more, then another long pull. Day after day, the stones arrived at the rising base of the pyramid. But bringing the stones to the plateau was not enough. They had to be lifted toward the sky. And stone does not climb easily. So the architects designed enormous ramps of mud brick and packed limestone chips, wide roads rising upward beside the growing pyramid. Up these ramps, the sledges climbed slowly, hundreds of men pulling together in rhythm, their voices rising across the desert in chants older than memory. Pull, rest, pull again. Stone by stone, the pyramid began to grow. At first, it seemed small, a rising platform above the desert floor. But with each passing year, the structure changed the horizon. 10 layers of stone became 20. 20 became 50. 50 became a mountain of pale limestone rising toward the sky. Sometimes I would stand on the plateau before sunrise and watch the workers arrive. The first light of the sun touching the unfinished stones, the long shadows stretching across the desert like dark rivers. In those quiet moments before the labor began, I often wondered something strange. Was I commanding the pyramid? Or had the pyramid begun to command me? Because the longer it rose, the smaller my own life seemed beside it. Kings rule for a lifetime, but stone waits for eternity. Years passed. Children born in the workers' village grew into men strong enough to pull the ropes themselves. Fathers who had dragged stones in their youth now watched their sons continue the work. The pyramid had become something greater than a project. It had become a generation's purpose. Yet the greatest mysteries of the pyramid were hidden within its heart. While the outer stones climbed higher toward the sky, inside the structure, corridors and chambers were carved with careful precision. An ascending passage rose through the body of the pyramid like a secret spine of stone. This passage led to one of the most astonishing spaces ever built by human hands. The Grand Gallery. A corridor so tall and so perfectly shaped that even the footsteps echoes along its length. Its walls rise upward in stepped layers of limestone, each layer leaning inward slightly until the ceiling closes above like the peak of a stone mountain. This gallery leads deeper into the pyramid, toward the chamber prepared for my body. The King's Chamber. This room would be carved entirely from granite brought from Aswan. Granite walls, granite ceiling, granite sarcophagus awaiting the stillness of eternity. But even granite cannot bear the weight of a mountain forever. Above the chamber, the architects placed enormous granite beams across the ceiling. Then, above those beams, they created hidden spaces. And above those spaces, another layer of granite beams. 5 layers in total. Ingenious chambers designed to redirect the crushing pressure of the pyramid's mass. Without those hidden spaces, the mountain would collapse inward upon the chamber. With them, the pyramid could stand for ages beyond imagination. 2 narrow shafts extend from the chamber through the stone walls of the pyramid. They're small, barely wide enough for a man to crawl through. Yet they point precisely toward the stars. One toward the constellation of Orion, the other toward the northern imperishable stars. When my body rests in that chamber, these shafts will guide my spirit toward the heavens, toward the eternal lights that never die. As the pyramid rose higher each year, the ramps grew longer and steeper. The work became harder, but the determination of the workers did not fade, because every man who pulled the rope knew something, long after he was gone. The pyramid would remain, and his hands had helped raise it. 20 years passed in this way, stone rising upon stone, layer upon layer climbing toward the sky. And at last, the pyramid reached its final height, more than 480 feet above the desert floor, a mountain of over 2 million stones resting together in perfect balance. Then came the final transformation. The outer casing stones were placed carefully across the pyramid's surface. Polished white limestone, so smooth it shone beneath the sun like frozen light. When the casing was complete, the pyramid reflected the sunlight across the desert like a second sun rising from the earth. Travelers could see it from miles away across the Nile Valley, a brilliant peak shining above the horizon. And in that moment, I understood something greater than kingship. This monument was not simply a tomb for a pharaoh. It was proof that human beings could create something that speaks across thousands of years. Empires will rise. Empires will fall. Kings will vanish into dust. Languages will change until the voices of my people are no longer understood. But the mountain will remain, watching the sun rise over the desert each morning, watching the stars drift across the night sky, watching generation after generation walk the earth and disappear again. And one day, far beyond my lifetime, someone will stand before that impossible monument. They will look up at the stones climbing toward the heavens. They will feel the weight of thousands of years pressing down from its silent walls. And a question will rise inside their mind. Who commanded this? Who dared to raise a mountain from the desert? Who believed a human life could speak across 4,000 years? Remember this. Not the ropes that pulled the stones, not the hands that carved the limestone from the earth, not the thousands who dragged the blocks across the sand. Remember the will that imagined it. Remember the king who refused to be forgotten. My name is Khufu. and I built eternity.